The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. For those of you who know me, it's kind of obvious why they've given me this passage to preach on. For those of you who don't, it's because I'm an astronomer. I'm a real astronomer, though like everybody else, I spend my day in front of a computer. But what I'm doing with that computer is I'm looking at stars and galaxies, I'm looking at space and the universe. Actually, most of the telescopes I use are based in space, so that makes me a rocket scientist. Awesome. So in fact, this picture of the space shuttle, this is my telescope was in the payload bay of that space shuttle, and I was in ground control working for NASA wearing the snazzy headset. Yes, I'm a rocket scientist. But I'm also a Christian, a real Christian. Those of you who are part of the church in Durham, you know me very well, part of the leadership, especially of Alpha, which is just a great way of getting to discuss issues and questions that people have about faith. So I'm a scientist and I'm a Christian. And sometimes people can find that a little bit strange. There can be this idea that you can't be a scientist and a Christian, that somehow they're in conflict. And of course, conflict makes great drama, which makes news agencies very happy because it sells. And it sells because we like drama and we like those sorts of stories. But the Bible got there first, you know. Biblically, it's the heavens declare the glory of God. Everything we study just shows us more about the glory of God. So I want to give you a quick tour of the universe, what we know about it from science, and then talk about how it shows us the glory of God. So here's a picture of the Earth from space. We're so used to this that it's hard to remember that it's only been 50 years or so since we've had the ability to take pictures like this. In our normal lives, our locality seems big. Seems like everything there is. And yet the entire Earth can fit on a single picture from space. Kind of makes the size scales we live in seem small. Yet actually the Earth is really small. Here's a montage of objects in our solar system. And it's the sun that is by far the biggest. You can barely see the Earth, it's that little dot on the side. The only reason it doesn't seem like the sun is far bigger than the Earth, because even on a sunny day, it just seems kind of small, is it's so far away, 93 million miles. And it's hard to imagine such distances. So instead, I'm going to talk about it in terms of the time it would take light to travel there. So that would be 8 minutes from the Earth to the sun. If instead I was driving in a car 70 miles an hour on a motorway, it would take me 500 years. I don't have 500 years, 8 minutes, much more my speed. So here we are, 8 minutes away from the sun. And I love this picture because it's directly showing us about how the Earth is illuminated by the sun, like the moon is. We're used to seeing the phases of the moon, but the Earth is kind of the same. It's lit up by the light from the sun. The sun's very different to planets and moons. It gives out light and heat, whereas planets, moons, they shine only by reflecting a tiny part of the light from the sun. So this is our solar system, and we're at 8 minutes. The outer parts of the solar system, that's 5 hours away. And there's pretty much nothing but empty space. Even within our solar system and out past 5 hours, there's just pretty much nothing but empty space. When we look at the night sky, what we see are stars. They're giving out light and heat, which is how come we see them. So they're like the sun. The sun is a star, and the nearest one is 4 light years away. And the rest are tens, hundreds of light years away. But we also see this fuzzy band of light across the sky. You need to go somewhere dark, like the middle of Northumberland, but then you'll see it. It's the Milky Way, and with our own eyes, it's not actually clear what it is, whether it's lots of faint stars or something truly kind of fuzzy. That had to wait until we had telescopes. So 500 years ago, with the development of the first telescope, we're able to resolve that fuzzy band of light. It wasn't just fuzzy light, it was stars and more stars, and yet more stars like the sun. Some a bit bigger, some a bit smaller. Many we now know have planets. And how many stars are there on this picture? You can start to count, but it's going to take you a while. And how does that tell us about that fuzzy band of light? Why is it just a band and not over the whole sky? It's telling us something about how the stars are structured in our galaxy. What you do is you take 100,000 million stars like the sun, some a bit bigger, some a bit smaller, many with planets, and tie them together by their own gravity into a big disk. And then, because the disk is so much longer than it is wide, when we look in directions along the plane of that disk, we see stars out to very large distances, so they seem faint. Whereas when we look in directions perpendicular, we soon run out of stars. And so when you go out and look at the night sky, that fuzzy band of light is telling you not just about a fuzzy band of light, it's telling you about 100,000 million stars, like the sun. Some a bit bigger, some a bit smaller, many with planets. And 100,000 million stars, you need a lot of space to put them in. So the size scale of our galaxy, something like 100,000 light years to go from end to end. But I've cheated a bit on this photo. So the one at the bottom, that's our own galaxy. That's the view you get from satellites, telescopes going around the Earth in space, looking along the plane of our galaxy, because the sun is in the plane of our galaxy. But the one at the top, in order to make that a real photo of our galaxy, we'd have had to send a spacecraft all the way out of our galaxy, probably about as far away from our galaxy as it is long, so that would have to be 100,000 light years away. We've only been able to send things into space for 50 years. We've barely got beyond the edges of our solar system. This is not a photo of our galaxy. It's a photo of someone else's galaxy that we can see with telescopes. It's something like 60 million light years away. So it's another 100,000 million stars like the sun, some a bit bigger, some a bit smaller, many with planets. And it's not just one galaxy that we see. We see galaxy after galaxy after galaxy. So here's another one where we're looking face on to that disk of 100,000 million stars, give or take a few. And you can see just how that is really a disk. Here's one that happens to be turned edge on to us, and you can see how much thinner it is than it is wide. And you don't have to have stars just in a disk. You can have a more kind of diffuse like that. The size and structure of galaxies is variable, but roughly on average, it's 100,000 million stars like the sun. Some a bit bigger, some a bit smaller, many with planets. And these are all nearby galaxies. These are only a couple of 100 million light years away. But when we look out into deep space, when we look out in things like the Hubble Deep Field, what we're seeing here are some of the most distant galaxies we know of. The ones that you can see as obvious galaxies on this image, well, they're only a few billion light years away. The really distant things on this image, you'd have to stare at it really hard, but there are some really faint little red dots. Some of those are some of the most distant galaxies we know of, maybe 13 billion light years away. And that means that the light from them, we're not seeing them as they are now. That light's taken 13 billion years to get to us, so we're seeing them as they were 13 billion years ago, not as they are now, as they were 13 billion years ago. And then the universe was kind of quite a different place. And the universe isn't static, because you can't stay still in a gravitational field. The only reason I'm not falling down is because there's a floor. Take the floor away, and it's kind of like those old cartoons when they run off a cliff and suddenly realize there's no floor beneath them, and you fall down very quickly. Without a floor, you can't stay still in a gravitational field. So the Earth obviously doesn't have a floor, so it's moving around the sun. The sun doesn't have a floor, so it's moving around the center of our galaxy, and galaxies themselves should be moving. Got a load of gravity here and 100,000 million stars, and another load of gravity here and another 100,000 million stars. That's a lot of gravity to pull them together. So you'd expect that things were moving towards each other. But overwhelmingly, when you look, they're moving away. The universe is expanding. And if things are moving away from each other now, then in the past, they were closer together. And in the past, from that, they were closer together still. And you wind it back, and everything's together. Everything is piled on top of each other. And you have this picture of a very dense beginning of the entire universe. Very different to what we see now around us, where galaxies are scattered into empty space. And so this is one of the pieces of evidence we have for this Big Bang origin of the entire universe, where it's space and time and matter and energy coming out of nothing. So how does that play with the biblical account? Can we actually just look at the Bible and say, well, in the beginning, in Genesis, it says, God said, let there be light. So maybe we can use the Bible to teach us about science. Well, I don't think that's a great idea, because the Bible isn't trying to teach us about science, it's trying to teach us who God is. So reading it to find out about science, well, not really a particularly useful thing to do. So in some sense, it's not that science and faith aren't in conflict. They're asking really different questions, and they start from really different places. So in science, we're saying, how and why do things happen if the physical world is all there is? But the Bible goes, well, there's a God outside of the physical world who made it all for relationship. They're starting in completely different places. And the Bible then wants to show us something about this God. So they're answering very different questions from very different standpoints. So then can we turn it around? If we don't use the Bible to teach us science, can we use science to teach us about God? Well, that tour of the universe, what it showed us is the universe is very, very big and very, very beautiful. The heavens declare the glory of God. But any God who made this is just so far beyond our understanding. When we look at the vastness of the universe and the insignificance of our size scales, How could we ever get a grip on a God that big? So what can tell us what God is like? Well, God can. It needs God to reveal himself to us in ways we can understand. And actually all faiths have this at the core, this idea that there's a revelation of God, that there's prophets and teachers. And in the Bible, in the Old Testament, you have prophets, teachers talking about what God is like. We've been doing a study of Kings, one of the books in the Old Testament. And there's one of those scary Old Testament prophets called Elijah. And one of the stories from Kings is he's very afraid. They're out to kill him. He's hiding in a cave. And he's crying out to God. And God goes, go stand on the mountain. I'm going to come. I'm going to pass by. And so Elijah thinks, oh. And outside, just the drama, there's an incredibly powerful wind. But God was not in the wind. Then there's this incredible earthquake. But God was not in the earthquake. Raging fire. God was not in the fire. And Elijah sat disconsolately in his cave. And then there came a still, small voice. And Elijah recognized that as God. All this dramatic power that's just been paraded before him, it's just power. But Elijah knew enough of God to know that, yes, God is all powerful, but it's just power. God isn't in the power. But then there comes this still, small, personal voice. And Elijah recognizes that as the personal God. And so to wrap it up, the more we study science, the more we study the world around us, the more we know of creation, the bigger our view of God who made it all. But however big our view of creation, however much we understand of how it's put together, the beauty and the intricacy, it's not big enough. It's just showing us how much bigger God is than us. And the only way we can get to understand that God is if he reveals himself to us. And in the Old Testament, in the Bible, God reveals himself as a personal God. God reveals himself as personal, not just power, not just the all-powerful out there, but the personal, the one in here. And if that's news to you, if you're kind of used to the idea of the God out there, the immense, the awesome, the all-powerful, but not of the God who comes alongside personally, who cares about the little speck of dust that you and I are as part of his creation. If you're hearing that still small voice in your heart today, then I'd like to pray with you that you come to know the God of the personal. And in the New Testament, actually God's revealing himself more as the God of the personal through Jesus. That Jesus actually shows us what God is like. One of the statements he made is, if you have seen me, you have seen God. He's not just a good teacher. Good teachers point away from themselves towards God. He's saying, If you have seen me, you have seen God, the God of the personal. So if you're hearing that still small voice in your heart today, then I'd like to pray with you to come to know this God of the personal through Jesus. So let's pray. Lord Jesus, come into my heart now and reveal to me this God who is personal as well as all powerful. I put my trust in you, that your death pays for all my selfishness that stands between me and an all perfect God, so that I can know you as personal, not just the powerful. Amen.